Lessons series. We are almost done with learning the basics of playing piano, but there are a few more important musical symbols that we need to go over today. We'll also discuss a theory topic called intervals, and we'll conclude by discussing some elements needed to play jazz music at the piano. So let's start by going over some more musical symbols that we can use to play an even greater range of music. First is the fermata. A fermata extends the note's length beyond it would normally be. It extends the length unspecifically, meaning you get to decide how long to hold the note for. Usually you can just hold the note for a few beats longer than it normally would last, but you get to decide how long it lasts in context of whatever song you're playing. Here's an example. There's a fermata on the final notes in both the treble and bass clefs, so we'll hold that note for longer than 2 beats. Let's try it. Make sure your hand positions start on an E and that we're playing F sharps and G sharps. 1, 2, ready, play. And hold. Here's another example. You'll see that we are given a fermata on a quarter note in the middle of a measure, followed by a rest. So we'll hold the quarter note for longer than 1 beat, rest, and then come back in to finish the exercise. Let's try it. Make sure your hand is in F position. 1, 2, ready, play. Hold, rest. Another musical symbol we may come across is a ritardando. This symbol means that we slow down in tempo in the measure it is given. Usually, ritardandos are placed near the end of a piece so that you slow down through the ending. Here's an example. You can see we're given a ritardando in the second to last measure, so we'll start slowing down in that measure and keep slowing down through the end of the piece. Let's try it. Make sure that your hands are in G position. 1, 2, 3, 1, ready, play. Slowing down. One thing we've never talked about is why the last bar line in an example is thicker than all of the other bar lines. Well, the last bar line in an example is called a final bar line, and it indicates that the piece is finished. Sometimes we can have 2 dots placed in front of the final bar line, and this symbol is called a repeat. This means that we go back to the beginning of the piece and play it all again one more time. Here's the previous example we just played, but now we have a repeat at the end of it. So when we get to the end of this line, we'll play it all again. Let's try it. 1, 2, 3, 1, ready, play. Slowing down. And again. Slow down. Sometimes you can have a repeat that doesn't repeat the entire piece, but only a part of it. Here's an example. So when we get to the end of this line, even though we have a repeat symbol, we won't start again at the beginning of the line, but instead we'll start playing where the repeat symbol is given at the beginning of measure 5. Let's give it a try. Make sure your hands are in D position. 1 and 2 and 1 and play and. And go back to measure 5. Now sometimes when you repeat a section, the composer needs to change the very ending of the repeated section to make the piece flow together better. This is where first and second endings come into play. Here's an example that I'll walk through to show you how it works. This symbol is placed over all measures that make up the first ending, and this symbol is placed over all the measures that make up the second ending. So here's how you would play this. Start at the beginning and play as usual through the first ending. When you get to the end of the first ending, you go back to where the repeat symbol starts and play that section again. But this time, when you get to the beginning of the first ending, you skip over the first ending and play the second ending instead. Something else to note with this example is that our fingering will have to change in the third measure depending on which ending we are using. If we are using the first ending, we will need to use the crossing over technique to get our hand back up into position to play in the upper part of the C scale, like this. But if we are playing the second ending, we can leave our hand in the normal C position because those are the notes that are given in the second ending. Let's give this example a try. So make sure that your left hand is in the C position and your right hand is starting with your fifth finger on an upper C. 1, 2, ready, play. Crossover. Tuck under. First ending and back to the beginning. Crossover, and leave your hand here, and second ending. The other major theory topic that we are discussing today is intervals. An interval is the distance between any two notes. We've already talked about a couple different intervals, like whole steps and half steps. But we're going to introduce some different terminology to label each of these notes within a scale. Let's use the C major scale as an example. We start with the root C. The distance to the next note in the scale, D, is called a second. The distance to the next note, E, is called a third. The distance to the next note, F, is called a fourth. The distance to the next note, G, is called a fifth. The distance to the next note, A, is called a sixth. The distance to the next note, B, is called a seventh. Finally, the distance to the final note, C, is called an octave. An octave is the interval between any two identical notes. So G to G is an octave, and B flat to B flat is an octave. This C and this C are 2 octaves apart, and when we are in C position, the right hand is playing 1 octave above the left hand. The intervals I just described don't just apply to the distances between a root and another note, but they can apply to any two notes. For example, a fourth above an A is a D, or a second below an F is an E. One final point about intervals is that there are 2 types of intervals, melodic and harmonic. The notes in melodic intervals are played 1 note at a time. For example, a melodic fifth above G would be played like this. Or a melodic third below C would be played like this. The notes in harmonic intervals are played at the same time, kind of like a chord. So a harmonic fifth above an E would be played like this. Or a harmonic seventh below an F would be played like this. The last topic that we'll talk about today is an introduction to playing jazz piano. This topic is covered in this module's history lesson, so I'll save the details of the history and development for you to read on your own, but I will talk about some of the techniques that you will use when playing jazz. One of these jazz techniques is swing. When you play with swing rhythms, you play consecutive notes unevenly, where one note is longer and one note is shorter, even though you normally would play them for the same duration. For example, take a look at this string of eighth notes. If we played this regularly, it would sound like this. But if we played it with swing rhythms, it would sound like this. So all I did was hold the first eighth note in a pair slightly longer than it normally would be, and then I played the second eighth note a little shorter. Overall, the tempo of the piece should remain the same. Only the individual eighth notes change their duration. Pause the video here and try to play these eighth notes in a swung fashion. When a composer wants you to use swing in their piece, they include this symbol at the top of the music. And usually you do only swing eighth notes, as long as there is more than one eighth note present in a row. So to end this exercise, let's play a simple jazz example that uses swing rhythm. This is an excerpt from W.C. Handy's St. Louis Blues. We are given the swing symbol at the top of the exercise, so all eighth notes will be played swung. The quarter notes will be played like they normally would be. We have some moving hand positions. The right hand makes a jump down in measure 9 and then goes back up to its starting position. The left hand plays a walking bass line, which will require crossing over in 3 different spots, but luckily they all contain the same pattern of notes. Take a minute to look this piece over, and then we'll play it together. Make sure that your hands are in this position and that you're playing the eighth notes in a swung fashion. 1, 2, ready, play. Crossover, tuck back under, crossover, and back under. Before we conclude, I just want to point out that one of the most popular techniques in jazz piano is improvisation, which is a method of making up your own melodies on the spot within a song. This is not something I will focus on, as I'm more concerned with teaching you how to read jazz music, but I have a video resource linked below that goes in depth on how to approach improvisation, and I encourage you to check it out. I also have a few hints for this module's practice exercises. In exercise 4, you are given this symbol. This just means that the first time you play this through, you will play it at a mezzo forte level. Then when you repeat the section, you will play it at a mezzo piano level. Another thing to note is exercise 2 indicates that your left hand plays the treble clef. For this, you'll need to cross your left hand over your right hand to play each of those notes like this. If you need further review on any of the topics that we discussed today, please check out the additional resources I've linked below. As always, make sure to practice the post-video exercises and complete the theory worksheet, history lesson, and quiz before moving on to the final module. Bye for now.